You think you chose what's on your plate. You didn't. Every bite you just took was engineered in a laboratory before it ever touched a pan. You remember the kitchen. Not a specific one. The kitchen. The one that smelled like onions and butter on a Sunday afternoon. The one where someone who loved you was doing something ordinary, and it felt like safety. You remember food as comfort, as culture, as the thing that marked time. Birthday cakes, holiday dinners, the sandwich your mother made that no restaurant has ever quite replicated. That's the version of food you still believe in. It's also the version the industry spent 50 years dismantling, one additive at a time while you weren't looking. You still eat, you still feel full, you still call it dinner. But somewhere between that Sunday kitchen and the drive-through window you hit 3 times this week, something changed. And nobody put it on the label. It started small. It always does. It's a Tuesday in 1999, and you're 12 years old, and someone hands you a bag of chips at a birthday party. The first chip hits your tongue and something happens. Something chemical, something fast, something that bypasses thought entirely. Your hand goes back into the bag before you finish chewing the first one. You don't notice this. Why would you? You're 12, but in a research facility in Cincinnati, a food scientist in a white coat is watching data that looks exactly like what just happened to your brain. And she's smiling, because the numbers are perfect. The crunch was calibrated. Not discovered, calibrated. The salt-to-fat ratio was tested on hundreds of subjects before it reached you. The vanishing caloric density, the way the chip dissolves on your tongue before your stomach can register that you ate anything, was engineered specifically so your brain never receives the signal to stop. They called it the bliss point. You called it delicious. Here's what nobody tells you when you open that bag, order that meal, pour that cereal. The food industry spent decades reverse engineering hunger itself. Not to feed you better, to feed you more. In 2013, journalist Michael Moss published the results of years of investigation into the internal documents of companies like Kraft, Nestlé, and Coca-Cola. What he found wasn't a conspiracy. It was something more mundane and more terrifying. It was optimization. These companies employed neuroscientists, behavioral psychologists, and sensory engineers whose sole job was to find the precise combination of sugar, fat, and salt that would override your brain's natural satiety signal and keep you eating past the point your body needed. The bliss point is a real term. It was coined by a man named Howard Moskowitz, a psychophysicist with a Harvard PhD who spent his career helping corporations find the exact formulation of sweetness that produces maximum craving without triggering fullness. He worked for Pepsi. He worked for Campbell's Soup. He worked for the U.S. Army, optimizing field rations so soldiers would keep eating under stress. You didn't know his name. He knew your mouth better than you did. And here's where it gets closer to home than you want it to be. You've had the moment. Maybe it was last week. You weren't hungry. You knew you weren't hungry. You opened the cabinet and stood there anyway, looking at the shelf, and your hand reached for something, crackers, cookies, cereal eaten dry straight from the box. And you ate it standing in the dark kitchen at 11 p.m. Not because your body was asking for fuel, but because something in your brain was asking to be quieted. You told yourself it was stress. It was, partly. But the product in your hand was also designed for exactly that moment. The food scientists call it eating occasion engineering. They study the emotional states that drive consumption: loneliness, anxiety, boredom, the specific low-grade restlessness of a Tuesday night, and they formulate products to intercept those states. The crunch isn't just texture. Crunch is auditory stimulation that temporarily interrupts anxious thought. They knew that before you were born. Here's the number that should stop you. Cold. The average American consumes 17 teaspoons of added sugar per day. The American Heart Association recommends 6 for women, 9 for men. You are consuming, on average, nearly 3 times the amount your cardiovascular system can process without long-term damage. But that number doesn't live in a vacuum. 73% of the food supply in the United States contains added sugar including products you would never categorize as sweet: bread, salad dressing, pasta sauce, chicken broth, deli meat, crackers marketed as savory. Sugar is in places your brain doesn't register as sugar, which means your body absorbs the insulin trigger without your consciousness ever raising a flag. And insulin response isn't just about diabetes. Chronic insulin spiking reshapes hunger hormones. Specifically, it suppresses leptin, the hormone that tells your brain you've eaten enough, and amplifies ghrelin, the hormone that tells your brain you're starving. You are quite literally eating food that makes you more hungry after you eat it. They knew this. The formulation didn't change. You want to believe this is about weakness, about willpower, about the personal failure to simply eat less, choose better, try harder. That belief is also a product. It was manufactured. In the 1950s and 60s, the sugar industry, facing early research linking sucrose to heart disease, funded a now-documented disinformation campaign. Internal documents revealed in a 2016 study published in JAMA Internal Medicine showed that the Sugar Research Foundation paid scientists at Harvard to publish papers redirecting the focus of dietary research from sugar to fat. The campaign worked for 40 years. An entire generation grew up believing fat was the enemy, while sugar quietly colonized the food supply. The low-fat craze of the 1980s and 90s, the fat-free yogurts, the reduced-fat cookies, the Snackwells phenomenon, was the direct consequence of that purchased science. Every fat-free product that entered your parents' kitchen replaced fat with sugar and refined carbohydrates, because without fat, food tastes like wet cardboard, and they still needed you to buy it. You grew up eating the correction to a lie. The correction was also a lie. There's a moment, and you may have already had it, or you may be in the middle of it right now, where you start trying to get out. You read a label. You switch to Whole Foods. You go to the farmer's market and spend $11 on a loaf of bread that has 5 ingredients and tastes like effort. You feel better for a week. You feel virtuous. And then one day, exhausted after work, you walk past a fast food restaurant and the smell of the frying oil reaches you from 30 feet away, and something ancient and trained and chemically reinforced fires in your brain, and you go in. You feel ashamed after. Here's what nobody tells you about that shame. It was engineered too. The flavor industry, a largely invisible sector of the food supply chain, spends billions annually on what are called flavor enhancers, compounds that have no nutritional value and no natural origin, whose only function is to make processed food smell and taste more vivid than anything you can produce in a home kitchen. The technical term is mouthfeel optimization. The practical effect is that whole food starts to taste flat to a brain calibrated on industrial flavor. You aren't weak. You've been recalibrated. The difference is important, and also, practically speaking, almost irrelevant. The children's food market is its own chapter, and it is the one that should sit heaviest in you. 80% of food advertising directed at children in the United States promotes products that would be classified as high in fat, sugar, or sodium by nutritional standards. 80%. The products marketed to children are not a subset of the food supply. They are its most profitable segment, because brand loyalty formed before age 7 is among the most durable forms of consumer conditioning that exists. You watched those commercials. You begged for those cereals. You ate them, and now there's a child in your life, yours or someone else's. And you watch them reach for the brightly colored box with the cartoon mascot, and you know what you know. And you buy it anyway sometimes, because refusing feels like deprivation. And they look so happy. And you remember being happy about the same box. The mascot was designed by a psychologist. The happiness was the product. There's a version of this story where you wake up, read the right books, overhaul your pantry, and become someone who meal preps on Sundays and has strong opinions about seed oils. Some people do that. It's real. But here's the part that lives underneath the personal transformation narrative, the part the wellness industry, which is also an industry, prefers you not examine too closely. The food environment is not neutral, and individual choices exist inside structures. When 73% of your grocery store is ultra-processed food, choosing differently requires active, sustained, daily resistance to an environment designed by professionals to extract the opposite behavior from you. When healthy food costs 3 times what engineered food costs in low-income zip codes, choose better is a sentence that only makes sense if you have the income, the time, the cognitive bandwidth, and the geographic access to do so. 42 million Americans live in food deserts, areas where a full-service grocery store does not exist within 1 mile for urban residents or 10 miles for rural ones. The nearest thing that resembles a store sells chips, soda, and processed meat from behind bulletproof glass. Tell them to choose better. You sit with this now, the knowing. And here's where it gets philosophically uncomfortable. The place where the information stops being something you can process and file away. You know this. You've known some version of it for years. The knowledge hasn't changed what you eat. Not entirely, not completely, not without enormous ongoing effort. And that gap between knowing and changing is itself data about the nature of what was done to you. This isn't about information. If it were about information, the problem would have been solved by the first Michael Pollan book, by the first documentary, by the first nutrition class in every school that has one. Information entered the conversation decades ago. What entered earlier and deeper, and before you had language to name it, was the taste, the crunch, the specific frequency of the jingle you still remember, the reward pathway that lit up at 3 years old when someone handed you a brightly colored package, and your brain filed it permanently under safety and love. You are not fighting a bad habit. You are fighting an architecture built over 70 years by some of the most sophisticated behavioral science money has ever purchased, specifically designed to be stronger than your will. The executives who approved these formulations ate dinner with their families at home. The food scientists who calibrated the bliss point went home to kitchens where they cooked from scratch. The lobbyists who killed sugar regulation in 1977, in 1988, in 1999, in 2015, they knew what was in the products. They knew what the research said. They sent their children to schools with better cafeterias than yours. None of this is secret. The documents exist. The studies exist. The internal memos, the purchased research, the regulatory capture. It's all on record, in archives, in investigative journalism that won awards and changed nothing structural. The system didn't fail. It worked exactly as designed. Just not for you. You will eat again in a few hours. You will open something or order something or pour something. And somewhere between the lab where it was formulated and the shelf where you found it, something will have been added that you didn't consent to and can't taste. Not poison. Nothing so dramatic. Just the precise combination of inputs that makes your hand reach back in before your brain catches up. You'll call it dinner. They'll call it a repeat customer. The hunger you feel was never entirely yours. It was built, sold to you, and billed as an appetite.